Hello, my name's Annie Drew and I'm an intern at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection here in Venice. Today is March the 22nd and the birthday of Agnes Martin. Her painting, Rosa, from 1966, is in the Schulhof collection, which is part of the Peggy Guggenheim Collection and was donated in 2012. I think it's time now to make a confession. I was doing an art degree 4 years ago, and I was looking for inspiration as I wasn't very talented either in painting or drawing, so I took myself to London and I went to the Tate Modern Art Gallery where I found an Agnes Martin painting, and I thought, great, this is good, this is white lines with white lines. I can do this, I can make my millions. I think a little bit like people look at a Jackson Pollock and they go, I've got a bit of paint in the garage, I could stick that on a canvas, why isn't mine worth $1 million? I'm afraid I just didn't get it. I looked at it and I thought, is this minimalism? Is this abstract expressionism? I really don't know. And then when I arrived here at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection, and I looked around the Schulhof collection and saw her artwork, you can't miss it. As you walk in around the door, it is this 6 foot by 6 foot huge canvas. It's white and it has a pencil grid on it, and each grid is about this square. And again, I looked at it and I thought, very nice piece of furniture. But I don't get it. I don't get why it's worth millions, and I don't really understand why it is more than just a canvas with some pencil lines on it. And it reminded me of a play that I went to see called Art, and Art is about, you may know it, Art is about a man who buys a painting for 200,000 francs and he's terribly pleased with himself. And the painting is just a white canvas with some lines on it, very, very tiny, very fragile lines, a little bit like this painting. And he brings it home, and his friend says, "What are you talking about? This is rubbish. This is like the Emperor's New Clothing. This is just a canvas with a line on it." And the entire play is all about the two different points of view, and it reminded me of that. And I have to say, I felt much the same. So, long story short, I was asked to make this presentation for Agnes's birthday, and I have to say, I've been converted. And so if you would like to come with me, let's go on a journey and see whether you are converted at the other end, whether you feel the same as see it in the same way that I do, that there are no rights and wrongs, or maybe you already are an Agnes fan and you feel differently. So if you want to come with me, this is the journey.
A curious fact about Agnes Martin is that she claimed to remember the exact moment of her birth. She grew up in the remote Canadian prairies as the daughter of a wheat farmer. Her father died when she was only 2, and she had a very difficult relationship with her mother, who she described as resourceful but harsh and unnurturing. This solitude made her very independent and self-reliant, and I think provided the roots of her character. As an adult, she had various jobs and only became an artist midway through her life. Her art career started as painted portraits and landscapes that gradually grew more abstract, but she was often dissatisfied with the results. And being a very harsh self-critic, she ruthlessly concluded every year of her early career with a big bonfire. In 1957, gallery owner Betty Parsons invited her to move to New York, and she had her first solo show there at the age of 46. Life certainly wasn't easy for Martin. She suffered badly from paranoid schizophrenia that could render her catatonic, and she bravely voluntarily received electric shock treatment. She also struggled with other people's acceptance of her sexuality, as this was a time of homophobia. She was a lesbian, but she kept a very low profile and hated being labelled. She once said when questioned, "I'm not a lesbian, I'm not a woman, I'm a doorknob." I think she was always looking for a place of peace for herself, and through lectures about Zen Buddhism, she became interested in Asian thought and the value of contemplative meditation. Not really as a religious discipline, but as a way to help her get through her life. Martin praised the work of Mark Rothko for, and I quote, having reached zero so that nothing could stand in the way of truth. And following his example, she pared down her work to the most reductive elements. Her way of creating reflected this approach. She would sit and rock in her chair, sometimes for weeks on end, awaiting a vision of these restrained, reserved, exquisite paintings, which would finally arrive in her mind the size of a postage stamp. She would then have to meticulously scale up her vision mathematically to fit onto these huge 6-foot square canvases. She didn't really see them as her own work, but instead saw herself as a conduit for her creations to have this emotional impact of joy, beauty, innocence, and she really hoped happiness itself. Her canvases, made of such modest material of plain white acrylic paint and pencil, seemed to collapse the distinction between painting and drawing. She made these paintings so large and imposing because she wanted them to convey the wonderful feeling of reaching the ocean or finding a large door into another state, a place of solace in a world of information and noise. But coming back to my earlier question about her work being minimalist or abstract expressionist, the answer is that she really doesn't fit into either box. Her work isn't really minimalist like Judd's mirror boxes because it's absolutely not about materialism. It still retains flaws and the unmistakable traces of the artist's hand and has a personal, spiritual, emotional dimension that just doesn't fit with the minimalist movement. She herself preferred to be classified as a late abstract expressionist, which fits with the evident brushwork and the hand-drawn lines, but the content of this expressive movement usually contains some sort of drama between uplift and despair, whereas her art, controlled, quiet, tough, and painstakingly poised, is, in a sense, exactly designed to avoid drama. Martin also differed from the other abstract expressionists by insisting that artists should stay out of the world and have no political responsibilities. Art for her was something much more basic. In 1967, just as her career was really taking off and she'd become financially successful, she abruptly changed her life and abandoned living in New York. She gave away her brushes and her paints, and she bought a truck and a camper and spent much of the next 2 years living in trailer parks across the country until she finally arrived back in New Mexico. She found a piece of land some 20 miles from the nearest road with no electricity or running water, and she built a home with her own hands. Again, her early prairie toughness and resourcefulness, I think, come to light. There is a great story that when a friend of hers came looking for her one day and arrived in the nearest town, they asked a local if they could direct them, and he said, "Oh, you mean that woman who prepares and seasons bearskins?" She returned to art in 1973, but also always kept herself at a distance. She once said that an artist shouldn't have friends, pets, or lovers, as they were just far too distracting. As she aged, her canvases got smaller, but she continued to paint until a couple of months before she died at 92. Even at the end of her life, she was never far from nature. Her very last work was a tiny ink drawing of what looks like an opening flower. And this conveniently brings me back to Rosa, her artwork in Peggy Guggenheim's collection. So this is not really a painting about the world at all. It's a painting about emotions, beauty, happiness and love, the ephemeral and the intangible. She's trying to pare everything down to nothing in order to seek the truth, and to do the seemingly impossible thing of expressing these abstract feelings through a work of art. One thing she said that I thought was particularly interesting was that for her, music was in fact the highest and purest form of art in existence. She thought it was so strange that when people hear a beautiful piece of music, they can just accept it without question, that pure emotion that it awakens. And yet, conversely, in art, they always demand an explanation. So perhaps another way to read this work is to look at these lines as a music score, a mantra, or a repetition of a sound. When people asked Martin to explain her work, her advice was always, you must go there, sit and look.
Okay, so by now I am about 80% converted, and my final light bulb moment was hearing a story about a little girl who goes into Agnes's studio and sees a rose in a vase, and Agnes catches sight of this girl and sees that she is completely mesmerised by this rose. So she goes over and she asks the little girl, she says, "Is this rose beautiful?" And the girl says, "Yes, it is." And Agnes puts the rose behind her back and she asks the girl again and she says, "Is the rose still beautiful?" And the girl's a little confused at this, and Agnes says, the beauty is not in the rose, it's in your mind. And even if you can't see the rose, it's still beautiful. Now, to me, that story just sums up this painting better than any other explanation that I can give you. So happy birthday, Agnes, and thank you for everything you've taught me. And I think perhaps your legacy to all of us is that we need to slow down a little in this world of rush and information overload, and find an original, because the reproductions I have shown you on here do not do this painting justice. You really have to see it. So sit, think, and contemplate. And I think we all need to strive to find our own inner truth, beauty, and peace. Thank you.